Hello. Welcome to Speak Education. Today we're talking about the I Promise School. This is a school in Akron, Ohio that was started by LeBron James as an extension of his I Promise program that aims to help increase academics for students and to hopefully improve the graduation rates for students who may be struggling and falling behind. The school was opened in 2018 as part of the Akron public school system. They want to make it a public school in order to be able to help all students, rather than making it a private school where the people can help some students to be able to get in. The school is aimed to target those students who are in the bottom 25 percentile academically. The first year that the school opened, it only served 3rd and 4th grade students. Since then, it has reached capacity. It now serves grades 3 through 8, with graduating 8th graders going on to local public schools. And new students are only admitted to the school in the 3rd grade year. Now, parents can't simply enroll their students in the iPromise school. Each year, officials propose the iReady data for 2nd graders throughout the district, and they choose 120 students who are performing above 25% in reading. And then any students who would require specialized programs, such as a self-contained classroom, are removed from the lottery. Beginning in the 2022 to 2023 school year, the number of special education students was also capped at 10%. This was in order to comply with the union regulations that stated that if any class had more than a third of the students in special education, then it was designated as a special education class and needed to have extra supports. And because they were choosing from the bottom 25% of students, they were receiving a lot of special education students. So as you can see, in the most recent school year, now that it has been capped at 10%, they had a much smaller percentage of special education students. And in previous years, they had a higher percentage. So last year's 6th grade students are half special education in this red section at the top. And because of that, it was harder for them to provide the services that they needed for all those students, especially since not all students are diagnosed with special education before they go to their 3rd grade class. Some of them will get identified later, and when they're identified later, that means that they are going to end up with a higher percentage. So they decided to cap it at 10% for the most recent school year. In the 2022 to 2023 school year, roughly 28% of students overall receive special education services, and they are hoping that the 10% cap is going to help them stay within the limits of that 1/3 without going over and needing to add extra supports. All students who enroll in the iPromise school are given free meals throughout the day, as well as snacks. They're given free uniforms and a free bike and helmet at the beginning of the year. It provides free tuition to any of these students at the University of Akron if they graduate from high school and meet all of their requirements. And that's done through a partnership with the university. And from the outset, the purpose of the school has been to take students who are reading at least 2 grade levels below where they should be and bring them up to grade level. And in addition to providing these free bikes and uniforms and meals, students also have access to a family resource center. And this is for the whole family. It can provide food and other essentials. It has a food pantry, and it's connected to the iPromise Village, which provides transitional housing to any families who may be experiencing homelessness. So the overall goal of the school is to support not just the students, but their whole families, and to give them structure and support that they might not otherwise get. Their motto is "We Are Family." It can be found all over the school, and they keep those cohorts of students together from grade 3 through 8 without admitting new students during that time in order to help them form long-term bonds with their classmates. Now, since these students are coming into the school performing below their peers, iPromise has an extended school year that runs from the end of July until the end of May, so it's about a month longer than the rest of the Akron public school system. The school day also runs from 9 a.m. until 4 p.m., which is about an hour longer than a typical school day. $1.4 million is donated annually to the school by the LeBron James Family Foundation to hire extra tutors and other staff members to help give the students more intensive, individualized instruction. And teachers also make home visits, and there's summer programs available. So with all of this extra funding and all of this extra support at the I Promise School, it seems like the students should be excelling. However, lately it doesn't seem to be the case. And the question is, why do they seem to be failing? So there have been some problems, I promise, over its short run. A documentary was made in 2022 that gave the world an inside look at the school's first year of operation. During that year, it was reported that 93% of students met their growth goal in reading. However, due to the fact that the students began at the school performing significantly below where they should be, this improvement wasn't enough for most students to pass the state test. And the school received an F on its initial state report card. Overall, roughly 41% of students were able to pass the state test that year, which isn't bad considering how far behind they were when they started. Unfortunately, that seems to be the high point. In March of 2020, and only its second year of operation, COVID-19 hit. Obviously, this isn't a setback that only impacted the I Promise School, but it's definitely worth noting as the student achievement across the country was stunted by the lack of schooling during this time. As a result, students received virtual instruction for part of the 2019 to 2020 school year and also the 2020 to 21 school year. And in September of 2021, so only a short time after students returned back to in-person instruction, the founding principal of the school admitted to striking a student in the mouth, and she stepped down as principal soon after. In the wake of her resignation, the school went through 2 interim principals in that school year. A new full-time principal was hired for the 2022 to 2023 school year, but she has since left the school as well, and they are now beginning the 2023 to 2024 school year with yet another new face. So all of these changes have undoubtedly added additional stress to the functioning of the school during these already chaotic post-pandemic times. As a result, the progress made during the initial school year has appeared to have stalled or even reversed entirely. So looking at test data from the students who started at the school in their 4th grade year, about 11% of them passed the state test in reading that first year, 11%. And then during their 2020 year, there was no testing due to COVID, but in 2021, those scores went down to only 5%. After that, they did raise up a little bit again to 8.2%, and then finally in the last school year, they were back up to where they started at 11%. For the 3rd graders who started in that year, they came in a little higher. They started at 15.7%. Again, there was no testing during COVID, but in the 2021 school year, they went down to 5.8%, and then down again to 3.1%. And in the most current school year, they are up to 8%, which is slightly lower than where they started. These students will be going into 7th grade this year. For the math data, the scores are even more concerning. For the students who were in 4th grade that year, they started out at the beginning of the year at 39.4%, which is actually very good considering how low they were when they first started. Again, they weren't tested in 2020, but in 2021, that went all the way down to 2.5%, and then down to 1% during their 7th grade year, and then in their 8th grade year, it rose up to 9%. And then for 3rd grade, this is where much of the disputes about the school have been coming in, much of the criticism. They started out in their 3rd grade year at about 17.4% passing, but since then, not a single student has passed the math test in the last 3 years, which is very concerning data and something that a lot of people have been concerned about. So, this has led a lot of people to speculate, obviously, that despite all the extra resource and private funding that's going into the school, it's still failing in what it was originally set out to do, to educate the students. It was also put on a list of warning schools that are targeted for intervention through the state. In a recent board meeting, the director of school improvement for Akron Public Schools shared that when compared with other students in Akron Public Schools who did not receive instruction at iPromise, their ELA scores were slightly above where those other Akron Public School students are. So iPromise students and the other Akron Public School students started at about the same level, at about 2% proficient. And by spring, the iPromise school was able to raise it up to almost 20%, whereas for the non-selected students, they were only around 18%, which is a slight improvement. However, for math, they actually were significantly lower than those students who weren't selected. About 8% of students in the iPromise school were able to pass the test at the end of the year, whereas it was 14%, almost double, for those students who were not selected. So, why is the school having these problems? Why does it seem like there are so many issues? Why does it seem like they are struggling, especially in math? So, as mentioned earlier, the pandemic impacted the progress of students all across the country. So, iPromise isn't unique in that way. It's also likely that some other schools have had changes in leadership over the last couple of years. But neither of these reasons really adequately explain why these students seem to be underperforming compared to their peers. Again, the other peers who are in the bottom 25% of the class in the same school district, especially in the area of math. And even in reading, it doesn't seem like they are quite as far ahead as many people would like them to be. So, what's the issue? And it's hard to say for sure why these students appear to be struggling, but there are some likely culprits. It's worth noting that in addition to their academic needs, the overwhelming majority of students at the iPromise school are economically disadvantaged, and many of them have experienced some level of trauma. As a result, the school has a very high percentage of students with behavioral concerns. The iPromise documentary shows very clearly many of the struggles that these students face and how they're impacted by them, and the pandemic likely made these problems worse. The school implements a great deal of social emotional learning in its curriculum, and it has extra staff members to intervene if there are students who become aggressive or self-destructive. They avoid using detention and suspension whenever possible, and possibly due to the difficulty of working with this population, there is a high teacher turnover rate. Out of 57 teachers, intervention specialists, and tutors from the previous school year, 20 of them are reported to have left at the end of last school year, which is almost half. This could indicate a high level of stress or dissatisfaction or burnout among staff, which would negatively impact their performance on the job. And apart from that, lessons are going to be frequently interrupted so that teachers can deal with behavioral problems that arise. The school also struggles to hire new staff members. This is a problem across the board with teaching, not just at the iPromise school, but in a school with a high turnover rate, where a large number of vacancies are there every year, the teacher shortage becomes more pronounced. In the 2022 to 2023 school year, the school wasn't able to fully utilize the $1.4 million donation from the foundation because that donation is meant to hire more staff, and they weren't able to fill all of those positions. So having a little bit of a short staff, in addition to all of the needs that they need to deal with at the school, likely makes it a hard work environment and can lead to a lot of stress and high turnover, which is probably adding to the problems. So, what does all this mean? As of right now, the school continues to operate despite criticisms. LeBron James, as well as the school leaders, are hopeful that with some consistency working forward, that the classes will be able to fulfill the school's mission to increase student learning and improve those graduation rates. If we look at the latest data from the school, the younger grades that have been entering are beginning to perform better than they were. The class that was in 5th grade last year, so had been at the school for 3 years now, began with at 1.1% proficiency in ELA. They moved up to 5.9, and in their 5th grade year, 13% of them were proficient. 4th grade has not shown quite that level of growth. 3rd grade had 23% proficient, which is a fairly high percentage, especially considering the fact that these students started so far below grade level, although keep in mind that they did cap the class at 10% of students with disabilities, so they may have been coming in slightly higher. For math, again, we're seeing a pattern for the most part. For the fifth grade students from last year, they started out with 3.3% passing. It went up to almost 10%, but then went back down to 3% in their fifth grade year. For the fourth grade students, their first year, 11.5% of them passed, and in their second year, in their fourth grade year, 23% passed, and then for this incoming third grade, 17% passed. So for the younger grades, as of now, it does look like their scores are beginning to improve, and with any luck, that will continue, but it will take a couple more years of observing and hopefully having consistent management and no more pandemics. And that will really be able to tell us whether or not the school is teaching its students or not. Overall, the school so far does not seem to be living up to what it claimed to be, but they are hopeful that with continued work and good leadership, it's possible that in the future it can improve. So what are your thoughts on this? Do you think that's a good school? Do you think it needs to be shut down? Do you think that what they're doing is really helping these students? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, I am the State of Education.